Hello, everyone. So, tonight I watched The Monkey, written and directed by Osgood Perkins. And guess which actor shows up in the first scene? Adam Scott! Anyway, I am realizing I can make these videos a lot quicker than when I first started out. So, here we are with a review and analysis of Severance Season 3, Episode 6, Attila. The episode's title, Attila, sparked multiple thoughts. One of my favorite characters from Oscar-nominated film The Brutalist is named Attila, so that was the first thought that came up in my head. But then, upon Googling Attila, which there was a reference to history, I found that he was a leader of the Huns. A Greek historian, Priscus, wrote that on Attila that Attila was a man born into the world to shake the nations, the scourge of all lands, who in some way terrified all mankind by the dreadful rumors noised abroad concerning him. He was haughty in his walk, rolling his eyes hither and thither, so that the power of his proud spirit appeared in the movement of his body. As I'll discuss soon, Attila is the chosen pet name between Bert and Fields. So it is interesting to see if any of this description of this really scary Hun ruler applies to Bert, and if we'll see how he interacts in the world considering this pet name that he has. I felt throughout this episode, just something I want to note, there was a lot of emphasis on the distinction between the innie and the outie selves. They are distinct individuals. So I think the show just wants to really reiterate that, which I think is great because I have seen some reviewers talk about how these people are the same. And I am of the thought process that they're not. I think this show is also talking about nature versus nurture. There are parts of ourselves that do maintain because of nature, but nurture also is a huge factor in that. And as adults, the nurture is our memories. So our memories extremely inform who we are, and the lack of certain memories are going to change how we act. So anyway, without further ado, let's get into this recap and review. Let's start with Mark. So the episode opens with Mark regaling Ragabi about what he saw in his vision at the end of episode 5. He is confused about the wellness session facts, and Ragabi can only assure him that Gemma is essential to Lumen. I felt like Ragabi was feeding Mark lies about the possibility of reconnecting with Gemma to push him toward accelerating integration. I do wonder what her personal motivations are because she is giving a lot of time and effort into this, and it's still not clear for what reason, right? Yes, you could do this for altruistic reasons for the betterment of the world, and you think Lumen is evil. But I do think that there's something else going on there in terms of Ragabi needing something through proving that integration works. Anyway, we see Mark is very hungry throughout the day and is seeing more visions of his other self. Both his innie and his outie are starting to see each other. I am curious about how integration plays with space and time because in this episode, we see that Mark will be in one place and then he'll have a vision and suddenly he's in another space and time. So I just find that very curious if integration also messes with that space and time, which we saw with PD, and that is one of the confusing parts and one of the reasons why integration doesn't really work. But I'm interested to see how this plays out in future episodes because of fully integrated Mark. Clearly, we're going to be jumping a lot, so I'm holding on to my britches because we're going to be feeling like the Flash. Anyway, Ragabi and Mark have a confrontation about his flashback. Ragabi wants to speed up the integration process, but Mark strongly opposes acceleration, likely because he knows what happened to PD. Anyway, later in the episode, Mark agrees to accelerate the integration process, and in a conversation and situation I'll explain later, Ragabi conducts the procedure that is supposed to flood the chip, thus nullifying its effects. The effects are almost immediate as he has memories of having sex with Helly. Ragabi tells Mark not to make any sudden movements. However, right when she finishes the procedure, Devin knocks on Mark's door. Mark lets Devin in, and she tries to discuss her corporate espionage plans. Devin also mentions that she has a crush on the senator's wife at the birthing cabin. Saw that go very viral. People love a bisexual Devin. And we know that the actress who plays her is a lesbian with a female partner. Anyway, Mark does smell something and can't pick up a cup of water. He faints with Devin and Ragabi attending to Mark as he foams on his mouth on the floor. Excuse me. All right. So I decided to make Mark and Helly together since essentially Helly never really appears by herself except for a really short scene. So this is just Mark and Helly together because that's what we see a lot in this episode, which I love but also hate, and I'll tell you exactly what I hate. Anyway, Helly begins the episode by being very opinionated on the changed attitudes of her fellow MDR team members. She's still adamant about unveiling Lumen's secrets. At Lumen, Mark and Helly meet in a bathroom stall. Mark tells Helly about his elevator encounter with Mr. Milchek. Helly recognizes that Lumen is just engaging in a divide and conquer strategy. As Helly is about to leave to embark on further espionage activities, Mark tells Helly about having sex with Helena during the Orp Boil, or as it says, they shared vessels. That's a very cute way to talk about sex, as shared vessels. Anyway, Helly finds it difficult to reconcile with the information and leaves to take a walk. This is where we see the infamous teaser scene of Helly removing her heels, which for some reason everyone thought was an indication of pregnancy. Like, pregnancy symptoms happen immediately upon conception. In a short, me going off script here, I think one of the reasons why people are just throwing all of these theories out every time something is happening is because I feel like people are ignoring the main themes of the show. And this episode particularly, I think, does a really strong, makes a really strong point about this is about what it means to be human, the four tempers, what does it mean to have a soul, whether a soul goes to heaven or not, and there's even religious themes. So I feel like everyone just throws anything to the wall to see what sticks because you all are ignoring the themes that the show's really trying to explore. So in later part of this video, I'm going to talk about my theory about Max Weber and this idea of Protestantism in a better capitalist society. Anyway, all right. So Helly finds it difficult to reconcile with the information and takes a walk. Anyway, Helly cries in a literal corner contemplating the context of her relationship with Mark in consideration of the fact that she knows that her outie has had sex with Mark. So she resolves to have sex with Mark herself so that she has her own memory of it. Mark and Helly use an unused workroom to have sex, making a tent out of the plastic coverings. The sex is not as raw as it was in Orpo, and I think they were doing this more out of necessity as opposed to the raw passion that we saw at the Orpo. It is important to note that Mark asked explicitly for consent, which did not happen in his experience with Helena. And so we see also in this episode, Mark really talking about how, Helena tricked him and how she's not a good person. It's an assault. I think most people would assume that what Helena did was an assault. And I think that that's why you see him explicitly asking Helly in this encounter, because he needs that reassurance that this is consensual. On their return from their escapades, Mark's nose starts bleeding as a result of integration. Miss Huang attends to Mark's nose while asking a lot of questions. Miss Huang is surprisingly adept at administering first aid, and I wonder if this is a part of the fellowship to know basic medical care, like a Girl Scout first aid workshop. Miss Huang just seems very advanced for somebody her age, but I'm glad that she knows how to help somebody with a nosebleed. Anyway, later we see Audi Mark at a Chinese restaurant eating Lau Mein like it's his first meal in a year. Helena just so happens to sit across from him. She's clearly stalking him and planned this bump in to maintain some form of connection with Mark. Helena comes off as so slimy throughout this entire conversation. I hate her. She tries to recreate the rapport that she had with Mark on the severed floor. I really think she's just a bad person. Her Audi is very clearly going to hell, so thank God she got severed so that Helly can go to heaven. Anyway, she starts a conversation under the guise of apologizing for the OTC and wanting to learn more about his perspective or his experience with the OTC, but Lumen clearly has everything that they need from Mark already regarding that incident. Anyway, Helena affirms that she's the quote-unquote head of the company, which based off of what we've seen in these last couple of episodes, I don't think that's true. I would go to Mr. Drummond first before I went to Helena in regards to trying to get Lumen to do something. Anyway, she makes weird commentary about Mark meeting her dad, which considering how important Cold Harbor is to the whole company, Mark is very likely to meet James Egan in the near future. She then pretends she doesn't know the name of Mark's wife, which again, very scummy behavior because you could see that it hurts him. And even just being told about that, it's not normal human behavior. I hate Helena. She's just stabbing at a wound. Anyway, fortunately, Mark starts to cough and leaves the restaurant. While he doesn't know the full extent of his relationship with Helly/Helena, Mark does sense that there's something more between them, which makes him rush home to accelerate the integration process. So this encounter at the diner, the Chinese diner, is the reason why he tells Ragabi, yo, speed that shit up because weird shit is happening and I actually want to know the full context of that weird shit. So let's get to other weird but kind of cute stuff. Dylan tells the rest of the MDR team when they're conversing about the export hall, which he for the first time is telling Helly and Mark about, that he's trying to play it safe. And it's clear that part of this is because he still wants to be able to see his Audie's wife. Anyway, any Dylan is able to get another session with Gretchen where they talk about the first date that Audie Dylan had with Gretchen and other facts about Audie Dylan. We see that Audie Dylan can be a bit reckless with money and has a lot of diverse interests he hops between. And I kind of agree that parents, for example, should definitely have their own interests and find their passion. But I think the show's heavily hinting at the fact that Audie Dylan just does not know where the boundaries are with that. And it's clearly negatively affecting the financial health of their family. Anyway, Gretchen is afraid that Audie Dylan is not happy, but Any Dylan reassures her that that can't be the case because he's super happy when he's with Gretchen. Oh, look at him putting on the moves. Dylan asks Gretchen for a hug and she gladly gives it, and then the hug transitions into passionate kissing. At dinner that night, Audie Dylan talks about test driving a car, again in reference to his reckless spending habits because he actually wanted to buy a car, and Gretchen just looking at Dylan like, bro, buying a car? Anyway, they clearly he says he's just going to test drive it. Also, I wouldn't really trust him on that point. Anyway, Audie Dylan asks her about her meeting at Lumen, and she lies and says that the meeting was canceled. Audie Dylan seems a little skeptical, so let's see if he does some independent sleuthing in regards to Gretchen's relationship with the Innie. I mean, I don't know even how he would do that, but something could be said about his Audi sort of going to Lumen, saying, I've heard about these meetings, I want to know more about them. And I wouldn't say it's his prerogative, but I do think that this is something we should look out. Maybe this is now Audie Dylan's passion project that he can actually follow through on. Maester Milchek, he's really coming to be one of my favorite characters. I think he's really complex, and he really shows the plight of an average person working in corporate. Most people I talk to on a day-to-day basis say they heavily disagree with the way their corporate employer functions in society, but they still work there. Why? Because they need to make money. And I think Mr. Milchek we see in this episode is clearly kind of in that same boat. Anyway, we finally have more clues about Miss Huang's presence in the office. Mr. Milchek invites Miss Huang to have a meeting where he heavily implies that he knows she was the one to share damning opinions on his performance. Miss Huang is a part of a fellowship where, in order to graduate, she must be deemed Wintertide material. It is at Mr. Milchek's discretion to deem her Wintertide material. This hints at Miss Huang not being severed and truly just being a child in the office, which again, a wild situation. I think there might also be something there in regards to Miss Huang being the child of somebody very important at Lumen as well. Anyway, Mr. Milchek tells Miss Huang to eradicate from your essence childish folly. We'll see how that's important later. Miss Huang is given control of the floor for the day while he works on addressing all the feedback from the performance review. Mr. Milchek spends the day working on becoming the man he believes Lumen wants him to be, which includes spending a ridiculous amount of time on paper clips and practicing clipping those papers quote-unquote correctly. He then goes in front of a mirror to practice using less big words in his speech. He appears to be mirroring the break room tactics of repetition to break down your mental psyche and make sure that you are the person that Lumen wants you to be. The scene ends with him telling himself to grow. It was an absolute acting masterclass. I really like these scenes. I think Terry Tillman is very much killing it. I really hope he gets nominated for an Emmy. And regardless, I know that he probably is getting so many offers for films and TV shows, and he deserves it. A really phenomenal actor. So now let's get to probably the most intriguing scenes that we saw in this episode, because we've really never seen anything like it, and those are the Irving scenes. So Audie Irving goes to Bert's home, and Bert rudely greets Irving by asking, "Who the hell are you?" but as a quote-unquote joke. But we can infer that this is a reference to Bert's true nature. Fields is played by John Noble, who very clearly is not the same man at the end of the season 1 finale. I kind of was expecting a bear-type gay man based off of what we saw at that season 1 finale, but I'm glad that we got Mr. Noble because I know him very well from the show Fringe, which I highly recommend. I really like that show. I know it's kind of, you'll watch it and you'll immediately be like, oh my God, 2000s is screaming at me, but I really like that show. Anyway, at dinner, the trio discuss the Whole Mind Collective and their antics. Bert believes they are off the deep end. Bert then explains why they got into Lumen, Bert says that when he was younger, he was a scoundrel. And of course, seems like a euphemism for something else, but he was really, really bad. But Bert knows that based on his past actions, he would not go to heaven. At a Lutheran church, which Fields and Bert have been attending for some time, the pastor talks about how the church's stance is that innies are complete individuals with souls that can be judged separately from their outies. So this is the motivation for Bert going into the severance procedure, because then this allows for Fields to have an eternal partner with his innie self. This ties to my theories about religiosity of Lumen and severance writ large. Max Weber wrote about how he believed that the capitalist spirit was brought on by the Protestant Revolution, and that the Lutherans are at the core of said Protestant Revolution. So I think there is further link to Lumen looking to create a more perfect capitalist society with religion, particularly Protestant ideals. And this has been something that since the 19th century, people have been saying that the industrialism was really brought on by the ideology of Protestants, and that it wouldn't have necessarily come about in that way. How the Protestants not really promoted these capitalist ideas, which when you read more into Max Weber, you see how thoroughly he kind of lays that out. And I do hope to make a video about comparing the book that Max Weber wrote about capitalism and Protestant ideals, because I think that that's really a large part of this show and why the show functions as it does. Anyway, Fields reassures Irving that they are not zealots. I don't agree with that at all. I think that they are one of the more important people, actually, probably in the Lumen religious society or what have you. In their conversation, Bert talks about how they changed their pet name from Hun to Attila 10 years ago. I think this is a reference to the Hun ruler that I referred to earlier, because of course they're saying Hun and Attila. They make a reference to history, and while they don't explicitly mention the history, I do think they're referring to the ruthless Hun ruler I made note of earlier. So I don't know, I feel dumb. I didn't know about this Attila guy, but whatever. I Googled it, so yeah, this Attila guy was ruthless, and I do think that this is probably an indication for both Fields and Bert. I think that these are two very dangerous men who are masquerading as innocent gay lovers. Anyway, Fields accidentally reveals that Bert has been severed for 20 years, even though the severance procedure has only been public for 12 years. Fields makes reference to Bert previously having dinners with any Bert's sexual partner. So very fascinating and interesting. It sounds to me like Bert was given free rein to quote unquote cheat, as long as the relationship began with his innie self. Also, I wonder if someone like any Felicia knows about Bert's affairs. Fields then asks if any Bert and any Irving have had sex. It's clear that Fields isn't 100% comfortable with any Bert's extramarital affairs. So even though he kind of makes an excuse, we see that he says that he talked to a Pastor Gale about how it is the right of innies to fall in love. And so clearly he's really struggling with the fact that he knows that his partner is innie self is having these sexual relationships with other people. And I wonder if we'll meet Pastor Gale, or if Pastor Gale is somebody that we already know, like say a Mr. Drummond. Anyway, as Bert takes Irving to the door, he hints at meeting with Irving privately again. He also tries to gaslight Irving about the whole 20 years severed. So I think we need to keep in contact with the 20 years severed thing, because clearly there's a predecessor to the severed procedure that we see today, which I think makes a lot of sense. You got to test on people to see if it works and how it does work. But I wonder if there was just a church organization that really use the severance procedure as their own way of forgiveness, right? The church is all about forgiveness, and Christ makes you anew. So I wonder if that's kind of what's happening with severance. Severance is the desire to make people new, the same way Jesus says you're born again when you're saved. So being born again is through the severance procedure. Anyway, we also see that Mr. Drummond uses the time while Irving is at dinner, to break into Irving's home and rummage through his belongings. So I think Irving is in imminent danger, but it's also a clear indication that Bert is working for Lumen, despite claiming to have been fired. I do think that his innie is actually retired, but I also think that Bert's outie has worked for Lumen in other capacities for a long time. Maybe his outie does things that would make a soul go to hell, since it's clear Bert believes that that's where his outie is headed anyway. Anyway, I really love this episode, I think I might make a separate video about religiosity and Severance, and how Severance is a way for people to be born again. And this is really about like Christian, more explicitly Protestant ideology. Regardless, I really loved it. I hope that you see me next time. But thank you for watching. This was Strategic Delusion. Good night.